To really know that if it's right is if the ball flies like a knuckleball and it's not getting a lot of rotation. So if you have a ball that rotates a lot, your speed's going to be up there because again, that's how we're measuring it. But if you're throwing a knuckleball and you got 10 meters per second speed, that's pretty good to go through that. Because again, if you're throwing that ball and it's rotating at a pretty good clip, there's something going on with your hands. Your chest is stopping. You're just kind of flipping that ball around and kind of going through with a lot of spin on the ball, which might be good from a pitcher's spin rate, but from throwing a medicine ball, I always say you want to throw it like a knuckleball, and if you can throw it, 10 meters per second at 5 kilos, you're doing yourself pretty good.
That was performance trainer David Donatucci speaking on the finer points of the medicine ball throw release in achieving the highest possible transfer to actual sport performance. You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Simply Faster. Simply Faster is an online athletic performance technology shop distributing items such as the Freelap timing system, GymAware, K-Box, 1080 Sprint, and the Speed Mat. I've gotten many of these items from Simply Faster and can confidently say that they make today's best training technology available to everybody. The Freelap timing system has revolutionized both my practices and my athlete assessments, allowing me to look at the 10-meter fly capability of dozens of athletes in a matter of seconds. It is wireless, compact, portable, and incredibly versatile. The K-Box and 1080 Sprint are fantastic tools for any coach looking to build speed, agility, and implement training scenarios that go beyond the traditional weight room. The 1080 Sprint is being used by great coaches training some of the fastest sprinters in the world, and it truly represents high-performance speed training. I can personally attest that Simply Faster's customer service is second to none. Christopher at Simply Faster responds quickly to queries, and anyone who makes a purchase from Simply Faster is in good hands. If you want to acquire some of the best high-tech training equipment available, stop by simplyfaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. They are the future of coaching technology. Hello and welcome to episode 123 of the Just Fly Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Joel Smith. Thanks for being here, and if you listen to this show, you probably like sprinting and jumping. I know I do. One of the things that I've grown into as a coach, I was a jumps coach, sprints coach, and track and field. I did a little multi-event, so some throws, but not a ton. And as I moved into full-time strength and conditioning, the cool thing about sports performance, strength and conditioning, whatever you want to call it, is that you have to really have a familiarity of a wide variety of sporting skills. One thing I like that David Weck has said, previous podcast guest, was his trinity of performance is swinging, throwing, and running. And we think of this in terms of these primal movements that we were meant to utilize as humans and are really built into our systems. And so I think that, well, obviously we talk a lot about running, which is cool. It's important. Speed wins games, and it's a very important factor. Haven't covered throwing a ton in this podcast, but one thing that is really cool and you see in a lot of sports and is probably very under-addressed is swinging. They're just the act of weight transfer from one foot to another, to swing a baseball bat, a golf club, a tennis racket. Honestly, even looking at the way the mechanisms of javelin throw and there's still this weight transfer swinging motion as force passes through the hips and up to the shoulders. So anyways, it's a skill that we don't talk nearly enough about, and I am completely beyond thrilled to bring you guys this episode today, because David Donatucci, who is the owner of the Florida Institute of Performance, is probably the foremost, at least in terms of who I've ever talked to and heard of, expert in the world in swing, biomechanics, and related medicine ball training, exercises, biomechanics, scenarios, programs, and he rocks this episode. Dave is certainly well known for his work with high-level golfers, but he has a totally diverse resume. He's been involved with lots of sports and athletes of all levels and types, and he has been using medicine ball training for decades and has honed in on essential biomechanical and kinetic parameters that really make this form of training truly effective. If you're in the sports performance world, that's such a wide term, isn't it? I should say track and field world. Let's say you're into speed and you don't really deal with rotational athletes. This is still a great episode because just swinging and coiling is an important part of what we do as humans. So you at least have something there. But if you are a strength coach, you work with all athletes. You should definitely know about weight transfer and various forms of swinging and throwing, and how to make your medicine ball training the best it can possibly be. So just had a blast talking with David today. And one of the cool things, I forgot to mention this too, and I mentioned track, is David makes use of shot put and discus references in the way he programs his throws. So there's this collision of worlds that I always totally appreciate. Anyways, that's enough of my little spiel on the background of this. But on the show today, we're going to get into some key components that bind rotational sport actions together. We're going to talk about the importance of the front leg block in swinging and how it's particularly important in golf. David's going to share his methods to get athletes into their front leg more in swinging motions when needed. He's going to talk about how to differentiate medicine ball training across different rotational sports for different needs, including launch angle. He's going to talk about medicine ball proper velocity and how you even get that, which he has a device and invention that can get that and read that and be very effective in that manner. And then he's also going to talk about how to approach the rear leg and push leg in swinging and as well as throwing a medicine ball, amongst other awesome gems. So again, if you train athletes, this is a must listen and has been honestly one of my favorite episodes, just because I train tennis and I just am constantly coming back to this episode. It is a classic in my mind, a gold standard in medicine ball training. So hope you enjoy it. Let's get to episode 123 with David Donatucci. David, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Joel. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so it's definitely exciting for me. I typically go in the line of speed and vertical jump, which is awesome points. And actually, that's something that I know we're going to talk about today. But I haven't done an episode really on swinging and hitting and rotation. And so I'm excited to talk to you about this today. And for people who aren't familiar with you or your background, could you key us into where you've been in the sporting and sport performance industry and where you are now?
Sure, I will. Thanks. I started my career, I guess, in Cleveland, Ohio, at the Cleveland Clinic Foundation, and what they classified at the time of their section of sports medicine. And during that time, I had the opportunity to work with the Cleveland Cavaliers, Cleveland Rockers, which was the NBA's WNBA women's basketball team. Did some testing with the Browns, worked with a number of figure skaters that were training locally there, and a couple of them actually competed in the Olympics. From there, I went to IMG Academies down in Bradenton, Florida, and I was the director of the International Performance Institute, where we really were a sports boarding school for baseball, basketball, golf, soccer, and tennis. Had the opportunity of working with a number of NFL combine players, Major League Baseball players, National League hockey players, and then NBA basketball players. Really training a lot of people throughout their careers down in Bradenton, which was great starting point. From there, I took a job with the PGA of America, where I was the director of fitness, their first director of fitness for the PGA of America, where rewrote a lot of the educational curriculum for the PGA Apprentice program. Did some training out of their Port St. Lucie facility there for a number of golfers, and then decided in 2012 to start my own business, which I opened the Florida Institute of Performance, which I've been to this day, working with a number of golfers, baseball players, figure skaters again, tennis players, a lot of rotational athletes in the sport today.
Oh, very cool, David. And so, yeah, I want to dig into that rotational component here. All right, so first question, and really excited to ask you this. I know you've had a lot of experience with a lot of different athletes, and again, this being the first show with a lot of rotational, really emphasis on rotational component to it and the training. So what are some key points of training rotation in sports that require swinging and or hitting? So say golf or baseball, tennis, what are the main components that bind those together? And then maybe we can get into some differences.
Yeah, the main point to kind of bind them together, there is a separation of upper and lower half that we really need to look at, and a lot of it looks at from more of hip rotation versus upper torso rotation. As we look at this, from people refer to this as a kinematic sequence, and how the body moves, how it rotates, and all those sequences are really similar. Meaning that most people initiate any type of rotation, whether it's a golf swing, a baseball swing, a tennis racket, forehand or backhand swing. There's going to be some, I'll call it a little bit of a linear motion with the lower half, and then there's a rotation of lower half, and almost that starts to slow, and then the upper torso starts to rotate after that, and then the hand and the implement then follows, and that's kind of where, and then that impact. It should be the highest velocity should be at that implement to go through all those. So the sequence of golf, baseball, tennis, on down rotational sports are really similar. Within the figure skating is the only one that's a little bit of an oddball in the rotational aspect in there because there's a lot of both vertical and there's almost like one non-implement, but the hands almost have to close into the body to get more of a rotational movement to kind of go through, get a lot of their jumps in there. So again, the hip motion, then followed by the torso motion, then followed by the arms, then followed by the implement is always a good sequence within there. And really, from a training standpoint, I'm still looking at, for me, it's hamstring strength being a priority, hip stability, abdominal stability, and shoulder or scapular stability kind of being the main focus that kind of connects all of the rotational aspects in there.
Yeah, training figure skaters must be a trip because yeah, they operate on a totally. It's like they're like a spinning top, versus the other types of athletes who rotate.
Correct, and it's interesting, kind of looking at how they, I'm not a big, bicep curl type of guy in terms of a lot of sport because I always feel that it kind of it's an add-on type of exercise. I mean, guys always like to have their biceps look good, but in figure skating, you actually need a lot of that pulling in strength to kind of hold your hands tight to your body. So a lot of bicep and a lot of chest strength to kind of hold it in as you're going through the rotation, and the jumps are a little different. Where we try to look at this from a vertical jump or looking at even a broad jump, how you want to kind of throw your hands out there. Where the figure skaters, they always want to hold them in tight as they go through their jumps. So it's a little has to change. Have to wrap my head around a few different motions with the figure skaters.
Oh yeah, right on. I'm sure it's just totally different world, but really interesting too. And so before we get into like training and vertical jump, what are some things that are really different in the sports? You work with some different rotational athletes. I know a lot of golfers. What are like some key differences that you might and I know we're going to talk about medicine ball training as we go on, so this almost could be a
Yep.
2-in-1. If we want to talk about some med ball
Yep.
training now, that's totally cool. Just because I know it helps to paint a picture. I mean, everyone throws med balls, but well, most everyone does, at least rotationally. But what are some key differences like golf versus let's say just golf versus baseball? What are some
Mm-hmm.
ways that those athletes are transferring their momentum differently, and then how we might want to look at that for training?
Yeah, the biggest difference is say golf versus baseball, and I'll look at this more from a hitting standpoint, is a lot of baseball players have a lot of weight after the rotation on their back foot. So that lower leg rotation is or back leg rotation is there's still a lot of I'll call it force into the ground or stability or body weight on that back side on that back leg. Where in golf it's almost coming completely up and onto the front side. So in terms of the motion, where you still will have, baseball players are going to give you a little bit of a stride. They're going to plant that front side foot down, and then as they start to break or reverse the hips with that front side, they're going to put some weight back on that back leg and create an angle with the shoulders, and that's kind of where we get a lot of the launch angle terminology. So now we're kind of getting that upward swing through the plane, through the bat plane of the through the ball is really kind of the baseball swing motion. The golf swing motion, again, you have that same thing where you're going to basically a little bit of a push force off that back leg. Going to plant that front foot into the ground. From there, you're going to create a little bit more of a vertical motion through that front side. So a lot of downward force into that ground. And then you're going to kind of get that rotation where a lot of the body weight now is coming off that backside. And we're really posting up pretty good on that front side, front leg motion. So looking at a lot of those types of things, we really kind of changed our feeling with our medicine ball and any type of our rotational throws is where with a golfer we may put a 6-inch box underneath their front foot. So now when they kind of load up that backside, they're going to push through and almost feel like they're really pushing up and through that front leg. So they're coming off that back leg. And, again, the big problem with golfers is a lot of them like to hang back. So they're really kind of getting into a feeling of they're staying on their back like a baseball player, where we want them to be forward. And the reverse happens in baseball is where if you get too much of that lateral transfer to that front leg, that's when the head starts moving, and we have really almost a missing of the ball because you want to keep your head more still on the baseball swing as opposed to the golf swing. So those are really your, again, kind of your two main components, two main differences with the golf versus baseball on that.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, one of the things I wasn't thinking about is the accuracy component, the position of the head. And I was just about to
Correct.
ask you about tennis too, which is like, that's right in there. The accuracy is supreme, right? Like the ball's coming at you well, I mean baseball too, but I'm sure tennis would operate. I mean, from my watching, it's more of a flat-footed, like same thing. Like the head has to stay still, or not flat-footed, but the less of a tendency for the rear foot to come off the ground.
Yeah, and again, tennis is the one big thing that we changed with tennis is we actually allow our players to almost go into like a forehand position. So, there's learning this multiple different ways of kind of hitting a forehand and a backhand, and depending upon how the coach wants to teach that athlete or how they position themselves in terms of where their feet are, whether they're stepping forward with that front foot or their back foot's back, or however they go through and work the motion. So they may be more of an open stance or a closed stance when they're doing their rotational throws, and it's kind of the same thing where we're kind of getting that push into a different motion and getting it more of I'll call it a hip rotation with very little bit of a linear motion with the hips. So with the tennis, again, we're kind of getting that big push, getting a good rotation of the hips, and allow the hands to follow into with the throws. Again, trying to, and I'll use the term a lot, emulate what they do with their club or the bat or the racket, as opposed to try and replicate it exactly the same way. So it's going to be a lot different with the medicine ball based on just on how they're going to hold it or how they put their hands and go through that. So I really try and get more of the lower half, or really the body, the torso and the hips, to work as if they're swinging the implement, as opposed to being exactly the same way they swing that. Especially from a golf or a baseball perspective.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's something I think I work with tennis players, and I think about that a lot. I watch them out at the court and with the various movements that they're doing and how they step into different throws, and I think to myself, well, this tennis ball weighs a good deal more than their racket, and it's in both hands, and so the idea of, especially when like you just mentioned, these common, I guess you could call them attractors in the Franz Bosch world, like the things that are similar between the rotation, but then the things that are different, you can really
Right.
coach up that lower body. And something I forgot to mention, like you said, it was like, and one of my mentors, or Darian Barr, who's been on the show before, has mentioned this, like the idea of the body passing along force in the transverse plane from one
Right.
joint to the other. And so it's like if you can get the lower body down and look at things there, then that's gold. Like that's a really strong component of where you can find improvements.
Yeah, that's correct. And it's funny. One of the biggest problems that we have with a lot of our athletes is a single leg box jump or single leg vertical jump, because the simple question they always have, especially a golfer or a baseball player, is what do I do with my arms? As opposed to getting that, we refer to it as the cross crawl action or the opposing actions and the opposing motions. I mean, that's a rotational motion that people don't realize. When you're jumping off your right leg, your left arm should pull back and you should explode up onto the box, and that should give you that movement. And that's kind of that cross crawling pattern that we go through, which is very similar to where that rotational movement is the same thing as be throwing a medicine ball from right side to left side. It creates that same rotational, that lateral movement pattern.
David, you said something really interesting about the lead leg. I wanted to get this before I forgot, and I think it ties into the next question. And I really liked it, as the idea of, you said putting the front leg on a block for golf, because
Mm-hmm.
that front leg, and that's an interesting thing all in and of itself too, is the lead leg in swinging or hitting or rotating, or the because I think it's just so easy, especially if you're in the paradigm of just force production, just more force, more weight, push, 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 of just thinking about the back leg and the back leg pushing and those things. Could you talk a little bit more about that vertical jump correlation into the rotational hitting in golf, and then yeah, that front leg block sounded really interesting. I'm curious how that all ties together.
The front leg, because they have to tie in together. So to kind of try and get this out there is So in a golfer perspective, in a baseball perspective, as you're kind of loading up that backside, everybody says you want to load on that backside. So it can be a little bit of a initial force in that from that will go back leg to the front side, but then there has to be almost, I'll call it a reversal of action. So now that front leg, that front foot needs to kind of almost plant in the ground, create a braking system, and work in the opposite direction. So as I'll use this case, my right leg is starting to rotate or push to the left. Now my left leg has to now drive into the ground and almost create a reversal, and that's going to start driving to the right. Now that creates the rotation. So you got two opposing forces kind of working within one another, and that's kind of where that front leg works as a braking mechanism, and it really kind of now drives into it. And that's why you see a lot of even pitchers for that standpoint, that front lead foot, how it drops off the mound. Now you see a lot of guys kind of planting that front foot and that almost going in the opposite direction from the plate, which then creates the velocity of the arm to kind of throw that ball into the catcher's mitt with a high rate. So, and that's the same thing that works within there from a golf swing or a baseball swing, and now we have that almost that front heel push where we're working our hips in the opposite direction, and now that creates you to almost give you more of a acceleration towards your target, if you will, or over the fence in terms of a baseball standpoint. And the idea with the box is to kind of create that feeling, that perception of now I'm actually loading up on that front leg, I'm driving into the ground, and I'm lifting myself up off the ground and creating that vertical pressure point, which now gives you that person the idea of now I'm actually coming through, and I really want them to finish, on top of that box with their whole weight and their hips facing the wall or their target point that they have in there. So that's really, and it kind of works with a couple things. We've done it with a band where you almost, with a looped band, you kind of put your front leg, step it all the way in there, and you wrap it up around your upper thigh, and you're going to tie it to, if you think I have this around my left leg, I'm not going to tie a band around to my backside. So it's going to cross over my left leg or my right leg. It's left leg's going to be in it, band cross over the front side of my left. I'm going to hook it to an attachment. And now that I have to actually push myself to the left to create that force against that resistance to move myself to the left and then allow that to rotate behind me. So, there's a couple of different ways of getting people the feeling of how do I get into that front leg situation where I can kind of create that force and really drive that action going forward.
Oh, that's cool stuff. I know with the vertical jump too, like one of the things that I've thought of a lot this last year is the correlation and causation. Like, what is it? Correlation doesn't always equal causation. Like an improved vertical jump is like correlated to longer driving, but it's
Yep.
like you said, unless you could put that into the right context by how you're describing, like it probably wouldn't be quite as effective. Like, one thing just to improve vertical, but unless you can create the stiffness and bracing and braking effect through it.
Right. And actually, I have a lot of guys who hit the ball really far that really don't jump very high.
Ah, oh,
So yeah, there is a correlation, but it's the same thing. Is you have to be able to work that rotational component or that I'll call it that change of direction very effectively. And I think that's more of that fast twitch component. I'll use the term the plyometric component where there is some sort of a action and then reaction that needs to be trained in there, and then really trying to create that explosive motion that we have within any type of swing.
cool. I'm glad you actually brought that up. Those guys who could hit hard and not jump super high. Just because I think I saw a study on it somewhere. That's just where I'm coming from, and obviously, everybody who works with golf is going to say, "Oh yeah, let's get your vertical huge." Which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, but it's just obviously just being mindful of the actual dynamics and specifics, and then too just how specific skills are, right? Like the guys who've been golfing forever but probably haven't played basketball or volleyball much and just don't have that skill.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, it's something that still needs to be worked on. I mean, you can't just say, "Oh, I jump very high." That means I should hit the ball very far. Right? That doesn't always work that way. I mean, it's what always frustrates a lot of the baseball players who think they're all big and strong and they can't hit a little white ball sitting there right in front of them. So there's a lot of skill component that goes into that.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of that. There was that Superstars show back in the '80s where they like all the athletes did all the different things, and golf was one of them. And I wish they'd bring that back. Like it'd just be fun to see how what skills cross over, what can you cross over, how is this if you're a baseball player, how is it showing up in your golf swing or whatever. So the stuff
Yeah.
I'd be interested in. I don't know if general America would be, but Anyways, all right, cool. So yeah, let's dig into medicine ball training a little bit more, and I know you've touched on it already. But and one of the big things I'd like to get into is kind of like how do we? You mentioned launch angles, so maybe we can go there. But like, how do we differentiate medicine ball training across a swath of different rotational sports? So like, I mean, I think it's just common. Oh, if you rotate, if you golf or hit or whatever, oh, just do a hip throw, and then leave it at that. And I mean, to some element, maybe there's going to be athletes who figure some things out just fine on their own. There probably are a lot, but at the same time, that has nothing to do with launch angle and then some of the other coaching points. So, can we just start with launch angle and then maybe roll from there on medicine balls?
Yeah, one of the interesting things that I've kind of changed over the course of my time is I call it a med ball shot put throw. Basically, putting the ball at your shoulder, and you're going to kind of create a rotation, and you're going to kind of push the ball out in front of you, like almost like the finishing of a shot put motion, without all the spinning. And one of the things that when I was working with a couple of the hitting coaches that are locally around here, they talked about where if we push the ball up a little bit higher, more of like a 30 to 40 degree angle, and kind of aimed higher for that, that's going to simulate more of what we're trying to get in a baseball swing. It kind of creates that upward rotation, if you will. And looking at it from me, really the shot put throw from a body motion, body rotation, really can kind of replicate a lot of the movements that we have in rotational sports, whether it be in tennis, whether it be golf, whether it be baseball. You can go down a line from there, but that kind of creates a lot of that rotational, that reverse direction, and then kind of getting that shoulder line working, back shoulder a little bit lower than front shoulder as you're coming through the hitting zone, and kind of working in there and creating that upward push that we have in there. And that was one of the big changes that we look at from a launch angle standpoint. And it was funny because we had a little program where we were running here where we did some medicine ball drills, some other type of training applications, and then we had the guys go hit baseballs off the tee, or some other type of stationary type of object that we had. And we had a little hitting coach out there working with them, and he had struggling with one kid. He brought him back, did the medicine ball shot put throw, and said, "This is how you want to feel." Kid went back and like improved his bat speed like 3 to 4 miles an hour just
Whoa.
from replicating that type of motion. So it's one of those things that you look at and you go, "Wow, that surprised that did it stick?" Probably not all the time, but that's just kind of that feeling of kind of getting that back shoulder a little bit lower and kind of pushing the ball higher, and going through that motion. And the same thing from more of I like what I classify as a discus throw. From looking at this, where I'm going to start my back to the wall, and then I'm going to kind of load up on my right side. I'm going to step my left leg to the wall, but as I'm stepping my left leg to the wall, I'm going to keep my chest facing the opposite direction of the wall that I'm throwing at. So now I'm going to create that separation, or that feeling of separation that the athletes need to get for, in my opinion, to really kind of create more of that whip, more of that torque, and kind of looking at that, and then trying to change that into a lot of that rotational, that lateral force, that they kind of grow. So you still have that loading on that back leg, separation away from the wall, turning the chest away from the wall, stepping to the wall, and then rotating that whole body and creating a big separation between your lower and your upper half, to create more of that whipping motion on that ball. And again, a lot of it depends on, really, from a sports standpoint. Golfers always try and say, look, you want to hit like you want to throw this ball like you're hitting a 4 iron, so it kind of be like a low line drive, on there. Tennis is kind of the same way. I want to kind of keep that horizontal to the ground as much as possible. And baseball is really the only one from a hitting standpoint that I want to create more of an upward push, through the ball. If I'm working with pitchers, I almost want to work on that downward angle, as to a lot of my throws that I'm going to kind of create. So I'm going to, again, kind of create that separation, and then I'm going to kind of emulate a little bit more of the pitching motion, where I may have them stand up in like a balanced pitching position, and kind of go through now a stride, and then maybe into a shot put motion where they're going to kind of rotate, keep that ball tight, and then push that, and go through that motion where they're getting a little bit of more of a rotation and planting that front foot and kind of feeling that little more explosion, and again creating more of a downward, pushing angle with the ball. So I think, to me, it really, represents what sport that we're looking at, even the position within the sport, and how I want to kind of emulate those types of positions as we go through there. To me, I'm biased. I've been using medicine balls a long time, and I really think that one of the few implements that you can create a high rate of speed. You can look at a lot of different movements. You can look at a lot of different angles. You can create finished balance positions, and you really can play with it, and make the individual feel like it's emulating that sport as best as possible. That you go through there, and a lot of the thing is too is I'm going to release it. So I'm going to throw that ball, and I can create that feeling of, hey, throw it as hard as you can, throw it as fast as you can, whatever that might be as they're going through the motion. And that really, again, that resonates a lot with a lot of people as they're going through that, because they can kind of get that feeling of, hey, this feels just like, what the way I should be swinging, and most of the time it is.
Yeah. First off, you have no idea how excited I am that you have track and field terms in your training program. That's so cool. Shot and discus throws. I mean, yeah, that's where it's at. So one of the things that I was going to bring up too as you're talking, well, also this, and this is one of those things where the divide and compartmentalization of our houses kind of can make this tough. Like you were just saying, this guy was doing hitting practice and goes out and does this throw and then comes back and his bat speed's up 3 to 4, and like you and I both know these can be very temporary motor programs, right? Like it's going to go away after a while, but that's what you need to do to make it stick, is to repeatedly put that in your warm up. And so to me that shows the integration of our field. Like it should be, that's how it should be, where so often it's just separate. As you were talking, I was thinking about this study that I remember this, I think back in college, and I think it maybe led people down, I guess you could call it maybe a misdirection. And honestly, I wish I had the study in front of me, but it was either pitchers or hitters, and it measured, they either did weightlifting or they did medicine ball training. And the weightlifting group had a better bat speed or pitch. Do you remember if it was bat or pitch speed? It was one
Yeah,
of
I
the
don't.
two.
Yeah, well, I know what you're talking about, and yeah, I don't remember exactly which one it was.
Yeah, but as you go through, well, I think of Anatoly Bondarchuk's work, transfer training, and how like I wonder what those medicine ball throws were. I doubt that they were nearly as specific as what you're doing. I
Right.
mean, just like I said just before, like for me, medicine ball training was just throwing a ball against the wall. Until 2-3 years ago, I had really no thought of front or back foot. I would have just said what I've always said, because this is just what someone told me, is just spin your back foot and push hard off your back leg and kick the cone or squish the
Right.
bug, before I knew any better. And so, yeah, if you
Well,
don't,
but they're still teaching that way too, so don't feel bad.
yeah. So, I mean, just indiscriminate throwing with no, and it's a heavier ball and there's not finer points of transfer, I can definitely see how the weightlifting group would come out ahead. But it's just like, well, just as in all the plyometric and vertical jump and weightlifting studies, the combined effort is always the best. So it's like,
Right.
obviously, there's no way that specific med ball training combined with strength could be nothing but the best in our best interest for athletes. And so I think it was just really good to hear you talk about these fine points that are going to maximize the transfer. And like, yeah, if a pitcher who's supposed to angle down is throwing a med ball at like a 10-degree angle up into the wall or something,
Right.
how much transfer is there? Or like it's just, yeah, it's an interesting concept.
Right. Right. It's always the thing I always come back to. There was a study with Dr. Kramer about specificity of training, and hey, we measured three groups of people: one on the squat, one on a jump test, and one on something else, and then they retested them, within that, and they retested the squat, the vertical jump, and the bench press. I think it was the third one, and they had all three groups training those specifics, and, bench press, vertical jump, and squat. And lo and behold, when they got done testing them, the group that trained for the vertical jump improved best in the vertical jump. That proved that they did the squat improved that. So the specificity is really kind of the importance of all this as we go through that, to really, again, try and blend it all together and know. Again, I think we have a complicated job, which most people don't realize, is we have to improve strength, we have to improve power, we have to improve mobility, we got to improve stability or balance. When we got to improve more of speed and agility type of thing. We got to tie it all together into that. So yeah, somebody who's never trained, one thing is going to help improve a lot of those things. But over time, you really need to blend all those together to maximize the benefits for each and every athlete that you're working with.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Oh yeah, right on. With the specificity as well, weight of the ball. So I think that's a common thing, right? Like how heavy should I be throwing? I'm sure it totally varies across the spectrum, but could you just give us some practical guidelines and insights there?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really that I have come across over the last few years is this thing called the ballistic ball, in which it really measures how fast you throw it, how much force you're putting into the ball, and what's your power output. that you have in there. And I've been looking at medicine ball training for years. I remember talking to a guy named George Davies, who was out of Augusta State for a number of years and did a lot of practical applications and testing on medicine balls. And there really has never been, hey, what weight should you use? Is always the big question. Oh, we just pick this one up. How's it feel? How's it look? And I think now with coming out with a new technology, we have ways that we can measure that. And kind of figure a lot of that out as to what is the best way of training this particular person for this particular weight of the ball, and kind of looking at a lot of those things. And I really think we're just scratching the surface with the introduction of this ballistic ball to determine a lot of those factors. But me and rough ideas, I want my speed to be around 10 meters per second. When I'm doing any type of my movement. So that's going to vary in terms of my ball weight or my movement patterns that we have for the athletes. May test them with a little bit of the overload every now and then, but I'm going to come back and make sure that we are getting some good foundation, within our speeds, within our power output, and everything else, in our force that we have there, with the ball, so that we can kind of start looking at some things. And really, it's also a great way of testing this. And as you mentioned with that study, you really had no way of doing what they're looking at for medicine ball throws, but now we have a way of, let's test the ball throws. Let's test some things with a rotational throw, a shot put throw, a vertical throw that we have there that we can put in there, and then we can kind of measure the speeds and everything on a 3 kilogram ball or a 5 kilogram ball, and we can come back and remeasure that. Now we have improvement. Before it was throw a medicine ball. Hey, how's it? Oh, great, you threw it for threw it 20 feet. Okay, good. But it could have been the worst form ever that you're going through there and doing all this. Now we actually work at this. We improve the technique. We go through this. Now we can actually measure the force, the power output, and again the speeds that we have within the ball itself to kind of go through a lot of that. So that's starting to turn the corner on a lot of these things from technology of today. To really look at fine tuning a lot of the things that we're doing from what which we believe is scientific. Now with numbers, we can show improvement on that. We can look at a lot of validity with our testing, and really be able to pre and post test a lot of these athletes come through there. And the biggest thing is once you start showing them improvement, they're really sold on the program, the training program. If you're not showing improvement, you better figure out ways you can change it. Because we have, biggest thing for me is power and speed are two areas that today's world of sports are not going away. Athletes are getting faster, they're getting more powerful, they're getting everything. When in the day do we ever imagine that you're going to have a 350-pound, 6'7" defensive end running a 4.5 40 chasing down a quarterback and going through that. So and we have it today. So it's one of those things that I think we're just going to get athletes faster and faster and faster. And it's a credit to the technology and everything else that we're looking at across the board.
Yeah, one of the things I always have worked on with the medicine ball throws, or really anything, because I've always just been a huge quantification guy. And I've my means have been with medicine balls and shot puts, because I used to coach track and do.
Right.
Very obviously that's obvious. How far did it go?
Right.
But in working like with swimmers, we'll commonly we have a wall we throw up vertically towards that could replicate like starts or backstroke starts. But I always want to find the wall that has lines on it, because I want you to know how high you threw. Because otherwise there's nothing for like the brain to latch onto.
Yeah.
This is how high I went. This is. And so, or there's like a railing, and we'll see if we can throw it over the railing, and they get all competitive. But and I think that's that can be somewhat straightforward for like just a raw distance or raw height. You might be able to figure that out. But like you're saying, when it comes to a specific launch angle and rotation, like a rotational throw, well, shoot, the only thing that I've ever done that comes close that could measure it was like my buddy Paul Cater and I occasionally would do like medicine ball throws back and forth. He's with the Orioles, but like under a beam, like you have to throw under this, and how far apart can you get, which is always fun. He just intuitively knows that stuff. But to be able to actually know 10 meters per second, I mean, that's like, it's like, in Olympic lifts, like I've worked with Olympic lifts athletes for a long time. I've gotten to the point where I'm like, look, unless this bar is going this fast, the benefits you're getting from this really aren't that specific to the hip extension torques that you're going to need in your sport. And now you're just massaging your ego, or you're getting really fast at dropping under the bar, which is a skill, and can be a good skill if you can do some things correctly. But anyways, long story short, I think that based off what you're saying with the launch angle, that does show just how important it is to get that quantification. Because yeah, like with the ballistic ball, which I've never used, but it sounds how you're describing it, like it sounds like that could really dial in that specificity. Because otherwise, you are probably just stuck saying throw under this beam and it has to go this far in this angle, or
Right.
throw through this hoop and it has to go this far. Which I mean, so yeah. You want to tell me a little bit more about that too, and then like the weight of the ball, because I was like, what weight does that manifest itself in, like to throw 10 meters a second, just for people out there, it's like, is a 4 pound ball, a 6 pound ball, an 8 pound ball? At what point does that really start dropping off for the average person to get below that threshold?
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, that to me that depends on training, because like anything, you want to keep progressing. So you may start an athlete off on a 3 kilogram ball and having them throw it, and they're getting 10 meters, maybe 12 meters per second. Now they're getting 13, and then you got, again, let's get the 4 kilogram ball, and let's try and get those speeds up. So again, we're progressing. And we can kind of really see that progression. Now we're throwing a 4 kilogram ball, 10 meters per second. Again, then we go up a little bit more from there. And I think that's really depending upon, again, just had a 11-year-old girl in here going through some, wants to be a golfer. She plays golf now, so throwing some medicine balls and doing some different types of things in there. I'm not gonna have her throw a 6 kilo or 5 kilogram medicine ball. So we're gonna start her off lighter, and then may have some older, strong guys. And it gives us a, where should we be starting, with, and where's our starting points of kind of going through, a lot of the movement patterns that we have, to kind of see. So the good news with the ball right now is we have it. I think they go down as low as 2 kilograms, all the way up to 6 kilograms right now. I'm trying to convince them to kind of go a little heavier, and I think there will, for the world that we're in today, is where, you got to go heavier. Everybody thinks that the more weights, the better, within there. But we're going to have probably some balls that are going to weigh a pretty good amount, and kind of seize a lot of those things. And the drop off point, and again, Joe, I think this is really going to look at this. I don't really know if we have all the answers for this point in time, but I think our questions are going to lead us to a lot of those answers that we're going to look at as to what's appropriate, what should the numbers be, where should we be looking at for this, and how does this transfer, into a lot of the different variables that we have. Is this right to help improve club head speed, or bat speed, or racket speed, or however we're measuring it, or serve velocity, all those types of things. And I think the more we can kind of test it, research it, validate it, I think it's going to give us a lot more of those answers. I really think we're on the cusp of figuring a lot of those things out.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. And that probably gives too. You think about, like, yeah, a young athlete who we're learning skills, right? Like, and I say this with Olympic lifts because I think it's velocity based training. A lot of people are familiar, but to me, a 2.5 meter per second clean is a different skill fundamentally than a 1.7. Like, they are different. They're different skills. And so I imagine the same vein. Throwing a medicine ball 5 meters per second is a very different skill. And especially if you looked at how the body summated forces through the back and the front leg to get to the speed, it's probably going to quantitatively show up differently. And so, yeah, I just think that it's definitely a really cool way of looking at training. I know too, the ceiling drill, we pulled it off in my buddy's basement because it was a parking garage, and there was nothing to break. But when you obviously, if you're in a nice facility, to say throw under this like light or something, like, and throw it as far as you can, eventually you're gonna get into trouble. Yeah, that's really so what's like good? Like, I mean, this is like the most general question in the whole world, but I'm just like, I don't know, sometimes I like to have really complex, polarizing, questions that polarize the field, but this is just a meathead question for, like, what would a good weight to be able to throw? If you could throw, let's say, 4 or 5 kilos at 10 meters a second, is that like a good, like, level, like you're doing really well for yourself?
Yeah, if you can throw that 5 kilogram ball at 10 meters per second, I think you're doing really good. You're creating a pretty good amount of speed with that. You got a pretty good force output, and you got really good body control, going through there. So you should have pretty good, use a term, the catchphrase term, kinematic sequence, that's working in there. And I always look at to really know that if it's right, is if the ball flies like a knuckleball and it's not getting a lot of rotation. So if you have a ball that rotates a lot, your speed's going to be up there, because again, that's how we're measuring it. But if you're throwing a knuckleball and you got 10 meters per second speed, that's pretty good. to go through that. Because again, if you're throwing that ball and it's rotating at a pretty good clip, there's something going on with your hands. Your chest is stopping. You're just kind of flipping that ball around and kind of going through with a lot of spin on the ball. Which might be good from a pitcher's spin rate, but from throwing a medicine ball, I always say you want to throw it like a knuckleball, and if you can throw it, 10 meters per second at 5 kilos, you're doing yourself pretty good.
Yeah, that's a cool thing you mentioned because I've noticed that, but I've never put I think too much thought into it. But maybe it's because I don't measure speeds, right? Like because until you start measuring things, like what's measured gets managed, and so like because I've seen the ball spin out awkwardly sometimes, but I mean, was it faster? Was it slower? Like like and so I want and then yeah, how did you arrive at a clean release, like that clean knuckleball release where the hands could release at the same time? Did your legs work correctly? One thing I that is interesting to me, and I've thought about this too, is when as soon as you can put a number on something, it probably could change the amount of coaching you might like need to do in the sense of like if an athlete, if all of a sudden the number is the output or you have a number to shoot for, the mechanics probably have a better chance of falling together by themselves in many cases. Like, would you agree with that?
Yeah, yes, very much so. And again, I think that's a lot to do with, again, I look at, we just kind of mentioned something briefly in terms of the spinning of the ball, and that's something that, there's mechanically, there's something wrong. So to me, I always go back to, well, the ball is probably too heavy for them, and they're really trying to muscle it more than they are trying to fluidly throw it. And kind of allow the body to get to work it. Again, it's that ego that we have is that I want to try and make as heavy as possible. I want give me the 30-pound ball as opposed to 10-pound ball, and I want to throw it against the wall as hard as I can. Well, if you can do that, great. But most of the times, most people aren't able to do that. So, I think that's kind of where we need to kind of look at and kind of put a lot of the things into perspective as to what's the finer points of this and how do we, and again, putting numbers on that, equating it to certain things is going to help us with a lot of that, a lot of the rotational areas and a lot of the movement patterns that we're creating with the body.
Yeah, I can see that like in my mind. I almost can see it like the ball would be less likely to spin probably if you get a good front foot action. Like if the front foot acts as a good break, then the timing's there, everything's together, the hands can release at the same time. Whereas if it's just like a squish the bug, push completely. Like there's no timer in the front. I keep going back to it, right? Because it's
Right.
easy to make fun. Uh, I just lost a lot of people on this show. A lot of people just not listen to the show. But it seems like yeah, like the spin. If it spins and something in the timing goes off, and that probably would be the front leg, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's either. I can go through a couple things, but it's either that or the torso stopped rotating and the arms just kind of take over the motion. 9 times out of 10, it's more the arms kind of take over the motion, and you just kind of throw it, or they throw it primarily with their dominant hand. So if you're a right-handed player and you're throwing the ball right to left, a lot of times that right hand, once they release the ball, the right hand will pass the left hand, believe it or not. So the left hand kind of stays through, and the right hand keeps going. So they're trying to throw it a lot more with that right arm, which creates a lot more of the spin, throws it a little bit more, called off center, and working a lot of that. So, a lot of times what I'll just kind of tell people is when they're throwing it is almost feel like if I'm throwing it right to left, is that left hand is going to smack, the wall behind you so that you're really opening up that top hand, and it gets the body to release a little bit easier and a little bit more fluid, and they can understand that as, opposed to kind of like, throw with both hands. I always just kind of talk about the front hand and almost like say, if I'm standing behind them, I'll say, smack me in the face, with your left hand, and that helps them to kind of get that, again, that torso to rotate a little bit more fluidly and allows the ball to almost travel more of that knuckleball type pattern as opposed to a lot of spinning motion.
Cool. Good stuff, David. Last, this is just a quick question, just because I touched on it a few times, and I'm curious. Is with the back leg, do you? So with I mean, a lot of people would say, yeah, like spin the back foot to push. Like, do you just kind of find if you just learn to transfer your weight, just things happen automatically, or how do you approach the back leg in medicine ball throwing?
A couple different ways. One is I actually go into more of a called a quarter squat position where I want them to feel, because one, they have to load on that backside. You can't unload something if you haven't loaded it already. So whether it's baseball, whether it's golf, whether it's tennis, whether you go, again, go down the line, you need to load up that backside. So I almost get them to the point where they're standing on that back leg to feel it, kind of rotate the body over that. So we're kind of like I call it a single leg quarter squat with torso rotation. So we're going to stand on my right leg. I'm going to rotate my torso to the right. I'm then going to place the ball in my hands, and then I'm going to kind of start the motion with my right leg, and then kind of, then we look at the baseball swing where I'm going to plant my left foot down and I'm going to finish the motion. So we got to get them to kind of feel like they're on their right leg, they're loaded on that right leg. They're going to give me a little bit of a push to the left, then we're going to plant that left foot down, and then we're going to rotate through. So we still want to get them kind of that feeling on that. And again, the release point, if you tell a baseball player to throw it higher or give me technical terms, a 45-degree launch angle, whether we're throwing shot put throw, rotational throw, discus throw, whatever, they're going to have a tendency to come back and almost be on that back leg because their body's going to be leaned a little bit more on that backside, which is kind of the feeling that you're going to have from that launch angle or weight. I don't want to say staying back, but head kind of staying in place and kind of staying in the back position, even though we have a little bit of that initial transfer from that back leg. With golf, I'm going to say keep going forward. It's almost like I called the Gary Player drill. One time a Gary Player would swing and hit balls. He would hit the ball and they would just continue and walk down the fairway. So when golfers kind of understand that motion, we're going to load up that backside. We're going to push to my left. I'm going to stand up through my left leg, and I'm going to carry my right foot forward, and I'm going to walk to the wall. And that kind of gets them into that feeling of where we're having that push motion. And again, a lot of it depends on from there is if they're still having problems with loading up that backside, I'm going to stay on that right leg. I may not even plant my left foot down, and go through that movement. So I may stay on that right leg. I might have them push off that right leg, and then I may have them almost feel like they're jumping and landing on that right leg. And the connection from there, maybe it's I call it a resisted lateral bound, where the skater drill, as people like to refer to it as, where I'm going to put almost have them jump off their right leg, land on their right leg without even worrying about a throw, and then kind of get that sequence where they're feeling themselves kind of pushing and having to jump off that right side and going through that motion. So that's and then come back to maybe do the medicine ball drill again, come back to that single leg jump again, go back to the medicine ball throw, and really kind of figure out ways to tie those patterns back together so they can again kind of get that motor pattern working in their mind so they can again kind of transfer it to their sport.
Awesome. I love that. That's just really good info. I was actually thinking I was kind of back in my early 20s, I played a lot of disc golf, and it's funny, there is similarities. Like I would always the best throws, you just kind of walked forward almost off of your throw a little bit, like you kept that momentum going. Gary Player, I love it, man. Well, hey, I think that's about all the time I had for the show today with the questions, David. Love your answers, man. Again, rotation, swinging, and hitting, and it's just I think an under talked about. I mean, everyone wants to talk about sprinting, right, and jumping, but I think what you're doing is cutting edge, man. And thank you so much for your time and answers today. I really appreciated it.
Thank you, Joel. I really appreciate it. I had a great time.
That wraps up episode 123. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Can't thank you guys enough for being part of this ongoing series. And I just love exploring all the corners of our field. It's just so fun and so rewarding to me, and I hope it is to you as well. You may have heard David talk about the ballistic ball. So measuring medicine ball velocity, you're trying to make sure you get that 10 meter per second threshold check mark as you progress in that swinging action and how to quantify it. So just realize simplyfaster.com, our sponsor, has that in their store. They're a great company, amazing customer service, and bringing you guys the best of in each category of sports technology. Also, if you have the time, one last thing, don't hesitate. Please leave us a rating or review if you like what we're doing. We totally appreciate it, and helping get the message out to other aspiring coaches, trainers, and athletes and parents who just want to learn more and get a little better every day. We'll see you guys next week.